consider themselves dedicated to their career path, their craft, their vocation of medicine, in which they are asked to take what is called the Hippocratic Oath and to conduct that sort of research, absolutely annihilating the essential elements of that oath, also conducted by representatives of the United States government. All of this work, all of the experimentation paid for with your taxpayer dollars. The participants in the experiment not only uninformed of what was occurring, but directly misled. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what classified means. Classified does not merely mean to keep secrets. That if asked a direct question about something that contained classified elements of information, that you would simply hush up, try to hurriedly turn the other cheek. No. Classified means that, if necessary, you will directly attempt to divert, to mislead, to misinform, to steer someone away from the truth. You'll flat out lie in order to protect that secret. That's what classified means. That's what programs like the Tuskegee experiments were considered to have been. And yet people like you and me, people who consider themselves healers, who dedicated their education and their lives' career to healing, they can make such hideous, heinous violations even of their own oath, of their own ethics, cross paths with their own God. Why? Because they're asked to? By whom? By their government? Your humble host is frustrated, ladies and gentlemen. Frustrated because not only do we have enormous amounts of history available at our fingertips, which in this information age are easily verifiable. You can perform in the course of 1 hour what researchers 50 years ago may have required a month. And yet, so many of us don't do that. You've heard an expression that ignorance of the law presents no excuse for acts committed unlawfully. Well, the same is true of history, ladies and gentlemen. Ignorance of history is no excuse for being burned by it over and over and over again. And we live in an era now where these powers that be, these powers who good men have fought and died for in a struggle against all throughout the course of human history, and where good men are dying today in an effort to expose the truth. We live in an era where you yourself might very well be freight trained by history, and you will not have even known the license of the truck that hit you unless you begin to do the research. I'm not asking you to hold all the information that's been presented by Dr. Stanley Monteith or any of my previous guests or even the information presented by your humble host as fact. No, rather the contrary. If anything, I'd like you to treat all of this as merely a signpost and begin your own path of research. Follow these threads, these names that we share, these events, these dates, these books, these authors, these researchers, and especially these members of the elite, these members of the ugly agenda. Take note. Begin the work. Begin the research. There are too few good men willing to commit their hearts, their minds, and perhaps their own lives to this work. Your help is needed. The call is out. The time is now. Ladies and gentlemen, along these lines of classified information, along these lines of how it is that we're not allowed to simply know the key findings, the important information, the essential operations of various aspects of our government, of our military. No, we're not allowed to know these things in their entirety, in their whole condition. Instead, we're forced to ferret out because of their machinations. We're forced to ferret out the truth by reading between the lines. And at times that entire truth comes crashing into the daylight. Just recently in the news, in the last year, A series of experiments conducted that were somewhat similar to that of the Tuskegee experiments came to light, and our U.S. government, our State Department, Hillary Clinton herself, were forced to make an apology for these things that were done decades ago. And that is the pattern. Ye shall know them by the fruits that they bear, and their fruits are evil. And that is their pattern. Their pattern is to admit nothing until they have full awareness that the lie can no longer be concealed. Just like these so-called leaders who are around us in this day. These so-called leaders, men like this Wiener in New York, who plays every angle of the gambit to try to hide his evil and his misdoings. Someone who, even when it first comes to light and he's forced to make his admission, although he'd been trying to keep it covered and concealed for over a week, when he's finally come to the awareness that he can no longer hide in the darkness with the facts of the matter, then his approach changes. And what is his next tack? Well, yes, I've made mistakes, but I don't see as though it's necessary to resign. I've broken no law. Sir, you've broken no law. You've broken no law. What commitment did you make to your bride? What commitment did you make to your God? What commitment have you made to your constituents? What commitment did you make to uphold the Constitution of the United States? You've broken no law, and so you needn't resign, but yet now you have resigned. And why? Because it's politically expedient for you. The sooner to crawl back under some stone for some time, the sooner the public will forget. And what saddens me, ladies and gentlemen of the listening audience, is that line of hideous, disgusting logic, unfortunately bears fruit. Why? Because between sports and American Idol and leisure pursuits and shit like Jersey Shore, yeah, Americans all too often do forget fairly quickly. And I implore you, do not forget. Good men for centuries have paid the price of their blood and their lives to create windows of liberty, to create microcosms of freedoms for you. Do not dishonor their sacrifices. Learn, read, build your knowledge base. Now it is more essential than at any point in history. I'm going to conclude by turning my comments back to how we opened our conversation. Our first guest on the Crimson Pill today was Mr. Ali Adams, who was gracious to join us, and we will pick up that conversation on next week's program as we discussed his findings in his research, mathematically based, in an analysis of the Holy Book of Islam, the Quran. We'll continue that discussion next week, but the reason that we began that discussion is because of the potential consequences, the ways that we might be affected. And neither Mr. Adams nor myself is making the claim that this is the end of the world. What we're attempting to offer you are signposts, places to look, places to begin your research. And with Mr. Adams, I want to revisit his website, which is www.helawave.com, HELIWAVE, helawave.com. And I implore you to go to that website. He has a white paper, a book, fully. It's fully fair to refer to it as a book. It is called Quran and 2012. You can access it for free on PDF format on his website, where he makes a very thorough and very detailed exposition of the methodology of his work, his approach, the use of prime numbers, and also he shares with us very graciously some of the conclusions that he reaches that extend beyond the mathematics and the text of the Quran proper. Folks, I have to wind the program down for today in short order, but I do wish to close on one final thought regarding Comet Elanine. Try to set the stage for next week's program when we rejoin our conversation with Mr. Ali Adams and talk about this more fully. Ladies and gentlemen, we've all heard about the Mayan prophecy. The time date that we're most familiar with in that sense is December 21st of 2012, but you need to know that we don't use the current calendar system that's the same as what the Mayans calendar is. Just like Mr. Adams shared with us how the Islamic calendar varies from our own, as well as the Judaic calendar varies from our own. Well, in fact, our calendar hasn't been a constant thing through the course of time. Today we operate on what is called the Gregorian calendar, named because it was commissioned by Pope Gregory only a few hundred years ago. And prior to that, the Western world primarily used what was called the Julian calendar, referred to because it was commissioned by Julius Caesar in 45 BC. And at each change in these calendar systems, big adjustments have had to have been made in how time itself is quote-unquote calibrated. And some folks have done quality research in the idea that the Mayan calendar does not end on December 21st, 2012 of our Gregorian calendar. Due to these adjustments that have been made between the Julian and later the Gregorian calendar, it is, in fact, believed by many of these folks who have done considered research that the end of the Mayan calendar is actually October 28th of this fall, 2011. And that is significant because that falls within mere weeks of Comet Elene's projected perihelion. More alarmingly even, it's within 12 days of its forecasted perigee, which is its closest orbital distance to the center of the Earth. The Mayan calendar, when factored in with the machinations of the Julian and Gregorian calendar and recalibrations thereof, the Mayan calendar actually ends within 12 days of Comet Elene's closest approach to Earth. And I finally end with the notion of Hopi prophecy, the Hopi Indians, the Native Americans, H-O-P-I. Between now and next week, folks, do a little research on Hopi prophecy. And I'll tell you just very quickly what they call their blue star prophecy. And Comet Elene will indeed appear to be a magnificent, spectacular blue star in the sky with a long element to it that probably would almost appear to be what Emperor Constantine saw in the sky back just before 325 AD that led him, as the story goes, story in quotation marks, led him to find Christ, to find Jesus, to convene the Council of Nicaea, and to found Christianity as it is continued to be known today. Well, that's how Elenin quite likely will appear for us in our night sky in September. Maybe as early as late August, certainly as we approach late September. Elenin will be, in fact, a blue star, and that is sometimes how the Hopi prophecy is referred to as. And part of the Hopi prophecy says, "The fourth world shall end soon, and the fifth world will begin. This the elders everywhere know. The signs over many years have been fulfilled, and so few are left. This is the first sign. We are told of the coming of the white-skinned men, like Pahana, but not living like Pahana, men who took the land that was not theirs, and men who struck their enemies with thunder. This is the second sign. Our lands will see the coming of spinning wheels filled with voices. In his youth, my father saw this prophecy come true with his eyes, the white men bringing their families in wagons across the prairies. This is the third sign. A strange beast, like a buffalo, but with great long horns, will overrun the land in large numbers. These white feathers saw with his eyes. The coming of the white men's cattle." Ladies and gentlemen, for now I'm going to leave you on that, the third sign of the Hopi prophecy. When we come back next week, we'll talk about the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth, and last sign of the Hopi prophecy, and we'll talk about how other paths and traditions have also foreseen certain crossings of lines of events in human history that might in fact represent our 11th hour, this window that we are in today. Ladies and gentlemen of the listening audience, your humble host does not believe that we face the end of the world itself in this coming 18 months. Your host fully believes that we face a change in the world as we know it that most of us are unprepared for. And whether the events that cause this change come from the heavens or whether they come from the people who do premeditated evil here on earth, there is a change coming. The question is, will we be prepared for it? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host, Antonin Fiore. Thank you so much for joining our broadcast today. We'll see you next week.